Jordan Peterson was an unknown psychologist from Canada just a few years ago, but he became a public figure in 2016 when he launched a 3-part video series on YouTube to protest a new law in Canada which amended the country's Human Rights Act to include protections for the transgender community. The bill added gender identity or expression to the list of prohibited grounds of discrimination or hate propaganda. Evidence that an offense was motivated by bias, prejudice, or hate based on a person's gender identity could even be considered for criminal sentencing. Peterson worried that he would be prosecuted for refusing to refer to a trans individual by their desired pronoun. Controversy and protests ensued while Peterson became a celebrated warrior of free speech on the right. Now his live lectures sell out and his YouTube videos often get millions of views. I've been quietly following Peterson's work, reserving judgment and avoiding mainstream media narratives with the intention of keeping an open mind. I don't agree with his thoughts on the trans community at all, but I do believe in protecting free speech, even if that speech is interpreted as hateful. So here are my nuanced thoughts on Peterson, which will definitely upset some of my viewers along with his, but I ask you to remain open-minded as you watch this. We should feel comfortable talking about and debating ideas that don't mesh with our own. Peterson gets one thing right. He has managed to address a generation of economically frustrated men who keep getting told that they're privileged compared to other historically disenfranchised groups. And I get it. Peterson isn't wrong in acknowledging their frustrations because statistically speaking, men have been falling behind both educationally and financially. The National Bureau of Economic Research found that since 1980, the probability of college-educated men working in a cognitive or high-wage occupation has fallen. In 1980, 66% of college-educated men worked in these jobs. By 2000, the number had fallen to 63%, and the number continues to dwindle. The same trend is noticeable in manufacturing jobs that have been lost to automation and outsourcing. In 1990, 21.8% of men had manufacturing jobs. By 2007, that number shrunk to 14.1%. Men have also fallen behind in higher education. According to The Atlantic, some 2.2 million fewer men than women were enrolled in college in 2017, and that's according to data from the US Department of Education. Keep in mind that wages have remained stagnant and men without a higher education or a career are less likely to find a partner and get married. This leads to a lot of anger that people like Trump tapped into. So in response to all of this, Peterson wrote a book and gives lectures on how men can better themselves. He generally emphasizes the pick yourself up by the bootstraps rhetoric.
But the problem is that you have to face what you don't want to face in order to fix it.
Yeah.
And so you look at all the things about yourself that need to be burned off, that need to be dispensed with. And that, man, especially at the beginning, especially if you're screwed up, that may be like 95% of you just has to go up in flames. And it's painful. Even some of that stuff that you have to burn off doesn't want to die. And it'll scream in agony while you're burning it off. It's not pleasant. But if you know that you're the thing that can transcend your problems, most fundamentally, if you know you're the thing that, if it faces the problems, can transcend them, then you have the faith that would enable you to take stock of who you are.
Look, I appreciate that Peterson wants to empower men or people in general to better themselves. During his recent appearance on Joe Rogan's podcast, he got pretty emotional just thinking about it. But I do have some critiques about Peterson's approach and how inconsistent his ideology is when he begins to talk about culturally enforced monogamy. When it comes to wealth inequality, Peterson admits it's a problem that he doesn't have a solution for, but he consistently mentions his disdain for the equality of outcome.
We have this idea, promulgated primarily by the ignorant left, I would say, that you can place the responsibility for hierarchy and inequality at the feet of Western civilization and capitalism. Okay, that's wrong. It's not just a little bit wrong, it's unbelievably wrong, and it's actually wrong in a way that's counterproductive to the aims of the left. Because there are terrible things about hierarchy and inequality. I mean, the problem with hierarchy is that it produces inequality, and the problem with inequality is that people tend to stack up at zero, right? You get people who fall out of society, they stack up at zero and they can't get away from the bottom. And then they get angry and they get hostile and the whole society becomes destabilized. Plus, there's all the suffering that goes along with that kind of unequal distribution of resources. And the left points to that and says, well, this isn't good, we should do something about it. It's like, fair enough. But then they take the next step and they say, well, it's a unique side effect of Western civilization and capitalism. It's like, no, it's not. The ideas on the left have this appeal to universalism that makes them credible and attractive, especially to people who are compassionate. But there is a line. Well, I'm suggesting that the line is crossed when we start talking about equality of outcome.
I'd agree with Peterson 100% if his interpretation of the left was accurate. While there may be some who think we should demolish our current system and demand equality of outcome, it's certainly not representative of what most progressives want. I personally love capitalism, but hate the corrupt crony capitalism that's practiced in America today. A successful economy typically has a healthy mix of private companies and public programs. For instance, there shouldn't be a profit motive behind criminalizing nonviolent behavior, which is what private prisons do. As a result, the US imprisons more people per capita than any country in the world. Profits shouldn't take priority over medical treatment, which is what we have with private insurance companies. At the same time, I don't want the government manufacturing my clothing or any other materialistic thing I enjoy as a consumer. Let's leave that up to private companies. The left isn't pushing for equality of outcome, but it is pushing for equality of opportunities. There was a time in America when antitrust laws prevented massive corporate mergers and monopolies. Those very mergers that frequently happen today allow for corporations to shed jobs as they consolidate. There was also a time when getting an education didn't mean digging yourself into a massive, inescapable financial hole. And even if you hit the genetic jackpot, come from a solid middle-class family, and work incredibly hard toward a successful career, it can all vanish in a heartbeat if you're injured from a horrible accident or become ill. Wanting to find solutions to these issues doesn't make someone a murderous Marxist. I also don't believe it's anti-capitalist to demand that the richest Americans just pay their fair share of taxes. Why should the middle class pay a higher percentage than multi-billion-dollar corporations? While Peterson is clear in his objection to the equality of economic outcome, he's simultaneously supportive of equality of intimacy. Here, he's a strong supporter of monogamy, which is cool. I like monogamy, but his reasoning for supporting monogamy actually contradicts his ideology on economic issues.
Societies seem to function better, that is, less violently. Let's say, when there's one woman per man, if there's many women per man, there aren't many women for every man. There are a handful of men, let's say a minority of men, a Pareto distribution of men who have a disproportionate number of women, and a lot of men who have none. And those aren't happy men, let's put it that way. They're men who are very likely to get up to no good very rapidly.
Okay, so just to make sure we're following Peterson's logic on monogamy, women, like money, tend to be a limited resource. It's dangerous for an attractive man to sleep with multiple women because he's essentially hoarding a limited resource, much like how the top 1% hoard the wealth in America. Peterson literally uses the word inequality in his argument against polyamory.
Polyamory, it's wrong. It's wrong, it makes men violent, it increases inequality.
Okay, so luckily, Joe Rogan asked Peterson to clarify this inconsistency.
You see this happening in universities where women outnumber men. So the men hypothetically have more sexual opportunity, but that isn't what happens. What happens is that a small minority of men have all the sexual opportunity, a fairly large minority of men don't.
Why is enforced monogamy the solution for people that are involuntary celibates?
Well, it's the solution to the relationship between men and women. Fundamentally, is monogamous social norms.
But these men are unattractive. If these men are unattractive,
solution to them.
But if these men are unattractive to women, I don't mean just physically unattractive. I mean women aren't seeking them as mates. They need to become men.
Yes, they certainly do.
This is
That's
what it
the
is.
solution.
That's the solution.
Absolutely,
and we
man.
both agree on this. So,
yes, but they need to do that in a society where monogamy is the social norm.
But isn't
That's
it
all.
the social norm anyway?
Well, that was partly my point. Although, to the degree that we deviate from that, we tilt towards a more violent society. I was making a very minor point.
I don't think they're related, quite honestly. I don't think that involuntary celibates. I don't think that having enforced monogamy as a part of our cultural norm is going to help those people. I really don't.
It does.
How's it going to help them?
Well, because what happens is if a polygamous society develops, which is the alternative, then a small minority of men get all the women. That's what happens.
Oh, okay, I could see that.
That's the only point that I was making.
Peterson and Rogan had a lengthy conversation about this topic, and we only had a chance to show you the heart of it, but I do recommend watching the full podcast, which aired about a week ago. Overall, I think it's interesting and healthy to examine how people think, even if it makes us uncomfortable, and that exchange definitely made me uncomfortable. Hear people out. Again, I don't agree with Peterson on a wide range of social issues, including his reasoning behind monogamy. I like monogamy, just not his reasoning behind it. Also, Peterson regularly shares his frustration about how the media and the left unfairly characterize him as something he's not. All right, I hear him on that because I've experienced it myself. But I do think it's important for him to consider how he spreads inaccurate characterizations of people on the left, which is what he did when he claimed that we all want equality of outcome. That is not the case. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed my show, No Filter, and I actually film it every single Monday at 1:30 Pacific, 4:30 Eastern. So you can check it out live on YouTube TV, just search for TYT Network's YouTube TV channel, or you can check it out in podcast form on iTunes later. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to check me out on No Filter.